What if I told you there's a food that never expires? One that kept warriors strong, explorers alive, and entire civilizations thriving for centuries. Long before modern preservatives, Native Americans engineered a survival superfood so durable and nutritious that it defied time itself. This wasn't just a meal, it was a lifeline designed to withstand brutal winters, endless journeys, and even warfare. But how did they create such a marvel of endurance and nutrition? And why is this ancient secret more relevant today than ever? Let's uncover the story of a superfood that refuses to die. The secret. There is no fridge, no stove, and no stores nearby. What kind of food could you keep at home or take on a journey that would never spoil? The Native Americans had the perfect answer: pemmican, a not-so-appealing dried compressed flavor-rich food. Now, here's the cool part. One of the biggest reasons pemmican lasts forever is because it has no water in it. Sounds simple, right? But this little trick is actually one of the greatest secrets of food survival. Why does moisture matter? Think about a juicy steak or a fresh apple. If you leave them out on the table for a few days, what happens? They start to smell bad, get moldy, and eventually rot. That's because tiny, invisible creatures called bacteria and mold love moisture. They need water to grow, just like plants do. But what if you take all the water out of the food? Well, then bacteria and mold can't survive. That's exactly what the Native Americans did to meat before making pemmican. The process of water removal was simple but powerful. First, they cut meat into thin strips, usually buffalo, deer, or elk. Then, they let the sun dry it out or hang it over a fire. This takes hours, sometimes days, until the meat is so dry it becomes rock hard. When dried, you can't just chew it like regular meat. It's like chewing on wood. With all the water gone, the meat could sit for years without rotting. No fridge needed, no ice, no preservatives. Just nature's way of making food last forever. The idea of drying food isn't just old history. It's still used today. Beef jerky, dried fruits, and even some snacks you eat come from this same method. If you go camping or on a long trip, you can bring dried foods because they don't spoil fast. Pretty cool, right? Removing moisture isn't enough. The Native Americans did yet another thing. Preserved in fat. If you have a secret treasure and you don't want anyone to find it, you hide it in a locked box, safe from air, water, and anything that could damage it. That's exactly what Native Americans did with their food. But instead of a metal box, they used something simple and powerful: fat. Now, you might be thinking, wait, how does fat help food last forever? Well, it's actually one of the smartest food tricks ever discovered. Think about a piece of bread left out in the open. In just a few days, mold appears, and it starts to rot. That's because air and moisture get to it, giving bacteria a chance to grow. But what if you covered that bread in something that blocked the air completely? That's exactly what rendered fat does. Rendered fat is fat that has been heated and melted down into liquid. When it cools, it hardens, forming a thick, protective layer over anything inside. It's like a superhero shield for food. Let's see how the Native Americans used it. After drying their meat to remove moisture, they crushed it into tiny pieces. Then, they melted animal fat and poured it over the dried meat. Once the fat cooled, it sealed everything inside, blocking air and bacteria. This simple trick kept pemmican fresh for years, sometimes even 100 years. The fat didn't just protect the meat, it also made pemmican an amazing survival food. Fat is full of energy, which means a small piece of pemmican could keep a person full for a long time. Explorers, warriors, and travelers carried it on long journeys, knowing they always had a safe and powerful food supply. Even today, we use fat to preserve food. Think about butter. If you leave it in an airtight container, it lasts much longer. Some fancy cheeses are stored in wax, which works the same way as fat. It keeps air and moisture out. The next time you eat something with fat, remember, it's not just tasty. It's one of the oldest food-saving secrets in history. And all thanks to the brilliant minds of the Native Americans. But wait, now that we know how powerful a pemmican is, you might be wondering, could I make it myself? Try it, then come back to the comment section and tell us all about it. Non-perishable ingredients. One of the biggest reasons pemmican lasts so long is because it has no perishable ingredients. That means nothing inside can spoil easily. But what does that actually mean? Let's break it down. Starting with what makes food spoil. Most foods go bad because they contain things that bacteria love, like water, sugar, or ingredients that break down quickly. Think about a glass of milk. If you leave it outside for a few hours, it turns sour. That's because milk has proteins and sugars that bacteria feed on, making it spoil fast. But pemmican has none of those things. Only 3 things. The dried meat, which has no water, a rendered fat, which is a natural seal that blocks out air, and sometimes it contains dried berries. By keeping only the essentials, Native Americans made sure their food could last through long winters, hunting trips, and even wars. Some people have found pemmican over 50 years old that was still safe to eat. Protects against oxidation. Leave a slice of apple on the table. After a few minutes, it turns brown. Leave it longer and it starts to smell bad. This happens because of a process called oxidation, when oxygen from the air reacts with food, making it spoil. It changes color, turning brown like an old apple or spoiled meat. The smell grows worse, like rancid butter, and as it decays, it loses nutrients, making it less healthy. Oxygen is everywhere, so most foods go bad over time. But pemmican? It fights oxidation like a superhero. How does pemmican stop oxidation? Fat creates an airtight seal, rendered fat. This sealed out oxygen, stopping the food from breaking down. Also, no water means no oxidation. Dried meat has no moisture, so it doesn't react with oxygen like fresh meat does. If you want food to last longer, store it in airtight containers, remove moisture, and keep it away from air. That's why vacuum-sealed foods last longer, and why butter can stay fresh when covered. Portable and compact. Another reason pemmican never spoils is that it's portable and compact. That means it's easy to carry and store no matter where you go. This made it the perfect survival food for Native Americans, explorers, and hunters. Why does portability matter? Think about carrying fresh food like a big steak or a bag of apples. First, it's heavy, so you can't carry a lot before getting tired. It takes up space. A backpack full of fresh food wouldn't last long. Lastly, it spoils fast, so you'd have to eat it quickly before it rots. But pemmican? It's light, small, and never goes bad. How is pemmican so compact? Dried meat shrinks. When Native Americans dried meat, it lost all its water and became smaller and lighter. Also, fat holds everything together. Instead of carrying separate ingredients, they mixed dried meat with rendered fat, creating a dense, solid block of food. It requires no extra packaging. Pemmican didn't need jars, bottles, or cans. It was stored in small pouches made from animal skin. Because of this, a tiny piece of pemmican could feed a person for an entire day. That's why warriors, hunters, and travelers carried it on long journeys. It gave them maximum energy with minimum weight. Even now, people look for lightweight, long-lasting foods. That's why hikers carry protein bars and dried snacks. They're small, but packed with energy, just like pemmican. Proper storage extends life indefinitely. One of the biggest proofs that pemmican never spoils is that it was used by real-life explorers for hundreds of years. These people traveled through the harshest conditions, freezing cold, burning heat, and wild, untamed lands. Yet their pemmican stayed fresh and kept them alive. Let's meet a few of them. How explorers relied on pemmican. Lewis and Clark Expedition, 1804-1806. In 1804, U.S. President Thomas Jefferson gave Lewis and Clark a mission, which was to explore the vast, uncharted land of the Louisiana Purchase and find a path to the Pacific Ocean. This expedition would take over 2 years and cover more than 8,000 miles. They would face freezing winters, scorching summers, wild animals, and the constant danger of starvation. Since they couldn't carry fresh food for such a long journey, they needed something that wouldn't spoil, was easy to carry, and gave them energy to keep going. That's where pemmican came in. Before they left, Lewis and Clark packed dried foods, salted meat, and hard biscuits. But those wouldn't last forever. As they traveled, they met Native American tribes who introduced them to pemmican. They made theirs from dried buffalo meat, rendered fat, and some berries. Pemmican was the perfect survival food. The Mandan, Hidatsa, and Lakota tribes showed them how to store and use it, giving the explorers a lifeline in the wilderness. As they moved west, the expedition faced its hardest challenge yet, the Rocky Mountains. Food became scarce. The bitter cold drained their energy. Hunting was nearly impossible. Without food, they risked starving before reaching their goal. But they had pemmican. Even when everything else ran out, pemmican kept them alive, fueling them through the mountains and pushing them toward their goal. Finally, in November 1805, after 18 months of brutal travel, Lewis and Clark reached the Pacific Ocean. Their mission had been a success, but without pemmican and the wisdom of the Native Americans, their journey could have ended in disaster. Because it worked so well, pemmican became a staple for explorers, fur traders, and even the military for decades. Some Arctic explorers later found a 100-year-old pemmican, and it was still safe to eat. Even today, survivalists and hikers use pemmican as a powerful, long-lasting food. So, if a pemmican could fuel one of the greatest journeys in American history, imagine what it could do for you. Fur traders of Canada. The Hudson's Bay Company and other traders relied on pemmican to survive long trips in the icy north. In the 1700s and 1800s, fur was one of the most valuable goods in the world. Companies like the Hudson's Bay Company and the Northwest Company sent traders deep into the wilderness to hunt and trade furs with Native American tribes. These traders paddled canoes across giant lakes, hiked through snowy mountains, and camped in freezing forests. They needed food that would keep them strong for months at a time, with no chance of spoiling. Pemmican became their most trusted fuel. At first, fur traders learned about pemmican from Native American tribes like the Cree and Métis, who had been making it for centuries. But soon, the demand for pemmican grew so much that it became a valuable trade item itself. The best pemmican came from the Canadian prairies, where giant herds of buffalo roamed. To keep their supply chain strong, the fur trade companies set up pemmican posts, special places where they collected and stored pemmican for their long journeys. Pemmican became so important that fur trade companies fought over it. In the early 1800s, the Hudson's Bay Company and the Northwest Company both wanted control over the best pemmican supplies. This led to real battles known as the Pemmican Wars. That's how powerful this food was. It was worth fighting for. Arctic explorers. When Robert Peary and Ernest Shackleton explored the coldest places on Earth, they packed pemmican as their main food. Imagine being surrounded by nothing but ice. No trees, no animals, no food. Just endless white stretching in every direction. The wind howls, the temperature drops to 40 degrees, and you're weeks away from the nearest help. What food could keep you alive in a place where nothing grows? For Arctic explorers like Robert Peary and Ernest Shackleton, the answer was pemmican. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, explorers set out to conquer the most extreme places on Earth, the North Pole and the South Pole. These were journeys where the difference between life and death depended on having the right food. Fresh food was impossible to find in the Arctic. Meat would freeze solid in minutes, and vegetables would turn into ice blocks. Normal food was too heavy to carry on long expeditions. That's why pemmican became the #1 survival food for polar explorers. Here is why pemmican was perfect for Arctic exploration. It never frozen. Unlike regular meat, pemmican's fat kept it soft, even in the coldest temperatures. It gave instant energy. In extreme cold, your body burns twice as many calories just to stay warm. Pemmican provided the perfect mix of fat and protein to keep explorers alive. It was lightweight. Carrying heavy food was impossible in the Arctic. Pemmican was small, powerful, and easy to pack. Also, It requires no cooking. When it's 40 degrees, building a fire is difficult. Pemmican could be eaten straight from the bag. In 1909, American explorer Robert Peary became the first person to reach the North Pole. He and his team traveled hundreds of miles over solid ice, pulling heavy sleds in brutal conditions. Without pemmican, they wouldn't have survived. Peary knew that traditional foods wouldn't work in the Arctic. Instead of carrying bread, fruit, or fresh meat, he packed pemmican and hard biscuits. Simple, energy-packed food that wouldn't spoil. It kept his team strong until they reached their goal. At the same time, another explorer, Ernest Shackleton, was leading expeditions to the South Pole. His journeys through Antarctica were just as deadly: blizzards, starvation, and freezing temperatures. Shackleton's men depended on pemmican so much that when their ship, Endurance, got stuck in the ice in 1915, they rationed their pemmican carefully, knowing it was the most valuable food they had. It helped them survive months stranded on the ice before they were finally rescued. Even modern-day Arctic explorers still use pemmican-inspired foods because nothing else provides the same long-lasting energy in extreme cold. Military rations. Even soldiers used pemmican because it lasted forever and gave them the energy to fight. Imagine you're a soldier in the middle of a war. You've been marching for days, carrying heavy gear, and suddenly, you're thrown into battle. There's no time to cook, no fresh food for miles, just the fight ahead. What could keep you strong and focused when everything around you is chaos? For soldiers in the 1800s and early 1900s, the answer was pemmican. Long before modern military rations, armies needed food that was lightweight, full of energy, and lasted forever. Traditional foods spoiled too fast or were too heavy to carry. That's why military forces around the world turned to pemmican, the same survival food that had fueled Native Americans, explorers, and fur traders. Pemmican was used in wars because it was long-lasting. Soldiers could carry it for months without worrying about it spoiling. It was packed with energy. A small piece gave them the strength to fight and march for hours. It was also lightweight and easy to carry. There's no need for cooking pots or fires. Just grab it and go. Lastly, it's perfect for harsh conditions. Whether in freezing winters or burning deserts, pemmican stays fresh. The British military was one of the first to officially use pemmican. In the 1800s, British officers studied how explorers and fur traders survived long journeys. When they saw how powerful the pemmican was, they decided to test it on their own soldiers. One of the biggest experiments happened in 1810, when the British Navy gave pemmican rations to sailors on long sea voyages. Unlike regular ship food, which often rotted, pemmican stayed fresh and kept the sailors strong. After this success, the British Army began including pemmican in military campaigns. During the Boer War in South Africa, British soldiers needed food that could survive the harsh African heat. Pemmican became an important part of their rations because it provided instant energy and didn't spoil, even in extreme temperatures. Also, by World War I, 1914 to 1918, trench warfare made it nearly impossible for soldiers to cook hot meals. The military needed foods that soldiers could eat quickly and easily. Pemmican was perfect. Some British and Canadian soldiers carried pemmican in their rations, using it as an emergency food when supplies ran low. After World War I, new foods like canned meats and dehydrated meals started replacing pemmican. But even today, modern survival rations are based on the same idea: lightweight, high-energy food that doesn't spoil. In fact, some military survival kits still include pemmican-style bars. For over 100 years, pemmican helped soldiers march, fight, and survive. It was one of the first true superfoods of war, a powerful, long-lasting meal that could keep warriors strong in the toughest battles. From ancient warriors to Arctic explorers, from fur traders to soldiers on the battlefield, pemmican has proven itself as one of history's greatest survival foods. It wasn't just a meal, it was a lifeline, a source of strength that kept people alive in the most extreme conditions. Even today, in a world of refrigerators, packaged snacks, and instant meals, the lessons of pemmican still matter. Whether you're prepping for an emergency, heading into the wilderness, or simply curious about history's ultimate superfood, the wisdom of the Native Americans offers something timeless: simplicity, durability, and pure survival power. Now that you know the secret of the ultimate survival food, would you ever try making pemmican yourself? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. And if you love discovering history's hidden gems, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more.